Well, the next fly we're going to tie today is a pale morning dun, and we're actually tying this a little bit larger than what I would for fishing, because for fishing I'd use a size 18, but to make it a little bit easier for you to see what we're doing, we're going to tie it on a size 14 today. And similar to the other flies, before we get started, we're going to pinch down the barb of the hook. That way we've got the improved safety from that, and have taken care of that before we invest the time tying the fly. So we're going to mount the hook in the vise again with the shank of the hook, the part that is straight before the bend, parallel to the tabletop. And then we're going to take our thread and spiral wrap that forward with about 5 wraps, and then come back over the top of those spiral wraps going the opposite direction, so that the top wraps will actually hold that in place, creating the jam knot that we've used to add the thread to the hook. And so you can see we've got this excess amount of thread that we'll then trim. That's called the tag end of the thread. And then we're going to put a thread base down across the shank of the hook. And I like to work with maybe an inch of thread outside of the bobbin, so that way I can make the wraps of thread just by rotating my wrist. I don't have to make big circular motions to deal with all of the excess thread. And so before we go to the back and put the tail on, what we're going to want to do is add the wings. And so we're using wing tips from, basically they're very, very small feathers. We want to set those up so that they're curling away from each other. And I'm going to hold those by the tip just so that everything stays together. And now that I have that, I want to measure that against the hook shank. So from the point right here where it was before it started to the bend up to the eye is the length that we want. Those are a little bit long, and so I'm going to reposition, and that appears to be fairly close to the right length. And so then I'm going to carefully bring my fingers right up here to where we had the thread, and we're going to make a couple of thread wraps. And I'm going to check one more time before we go too far that yes, those are about the right length. And so I'm going to come winding back towards the back of the fly to bind the hackle tips down. And we'll put a couple more wraps of thread there, and then we're going to come back up here, and what I'm going to do is stand those hackle tips upright, and I'm just basically pinching them slightly with my thumb to get them to bend back. And then I'm going to put a couple of wraps of thread in front of them, and then I'm going to splay them out to the side, and I'm going to make an X wrap between. So one down, then I'm going to bring this back up and through the middle on the other side, so that if I turn the fly right there, you see how we've now crisscrossed the thread in between, that splays those tips out so that the wings are positioned properly. And now that we've done that, I kind of want them standing up a little bit more. There we go. Then I'm going to come back towards the bend of the hook, and at that point we'll add in the tailing material. And there's one little barb of feather from that I want to trim out of there, so we just gave it a little haircut. And now we're going to take some of the tailing material. These are actually called fibbits or microfibbits. And for this fly, I want to have maybe 6 or so, and it doesn't have to be exact, but what we're going to do is hold those and measure them again against the length of the hook shank. And now that's getting close to the same length as what the finished fly is going to be. And so we'll take those, hold them on top of the hook shank, and then we'll carefully make a few two light wraps so that we can still position this and get them right on top of the hook shank. And now that we've done that, oops, I pulled one of the fibbits too far forward, but fortunately it's still something that we can pull back. There we go. Now I want to lock those in place, and I'm going to lift the tail up and put a wrap of thread underneath all of those fibbits. And if I do this right, then that comes in and that will lift them up, and we'll pull those back. There we go. And then we're ready to wind that forward a little bit just to lock them in place. And see how as we come forward now with the little bit tighter wraps, that cause those to kick up, and that's what's really going to lock the tail fibers in place. And it's something that in place of the microfibbits we could use spade hackle or tailing pack materials. All of those are perfectly acceptable. And I'm just doing a little manipulation of those wingtips again. So now that we've got the tail on, I'm coming back towards the back of the fly again and getting the thread positioned where we're going to put a little bit of cream color dubbing on. And we want to tease out a few fibers, and very thin. That will add a small amount of bulk to our thread and create the color for the body of the fly. And with this size of fly, I'm thinking that I may need a little bit more than that, but you see how right here we've got about that much of the color that's creating the yarn. And since it's going to be a little bit easier to add than it is to subtract, I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping the body forward. And now we're at the point where we've got a nice abdomen to the fly. And then we'll take our saddle hackle and go ahead and pull a little bit of that out. And what I'm going to do is take and clip a few of the barbs off of that so we have a place for the tail, or sorry, for the thread to catch and lock that down against the hook shank. And then we're going to move the thread back towards the eye of the hook. And I'm just checking to make sure that the wings are still positioned where we want them. And what we're going to do is wrap this hackle around the shank of the hook so that we've got 2 or 3 wraps behind. And then I'm going to come in front of the wings. And I'm going to stroke everything back just to give us a little bit more room. And put 3 wraps right there. And I'm going to lengthen my thread a little bit and put the locking wraps behind the hackle. And now I'm going to take the scissors and we'll trim off that excess feather. Now at this point what I want to do is put a half hitch knot on just to hold everything in place. So I'm using the half hitch tool, and then I'm sliding that up and over the eye of the hook, and then I back that off so that we didn't trap the barbs, and that created a knot on the head of the fly. Now at this point I could either do a whip finish or put a few more half hitches on, or what I prefer to do is use a double hitch, which is that loop of right there where I take half of the loop above the eye of the hook and half behind. I'll make that again by putting my finger right here. I do 1.5 wraps around the shank of the hook and bring half of the loop over and half under, and that then completes the fly. And what we have right here is a pale morning dun dry fly. Now I'm going to actually do just a little bit of grooming and cause some of the tail fibers to splay out a bit more, and you see how now we've got them coming out the back of the fly and going to either side, and that gives the fly just a little bit more stability on the water. And that is a pale morning dun.